The Magnificent Seven movie review. Yeah, actually, I need to start this off with a confession of sorts. I lived in Japan for 8 years, and I have never to this day seen Seven Samurai. I know, that's terrible. In my defense, I've tried to track this down several times. So, yeah. Quick digression here. My Japanese, when I was living in Japan, I was studying Japanese a lot, and I got to a suitable level of Japanese. So I could understand a lot of Japanese modern movies, you know, especially kind of simpler stuff, soap opera, love story type stuff. My Japanese was good enough to kind of cover me through these kind of movies. Samurai movies, especially like older samurai movies, like Seven Samurai, I think, came out in the 1950s. Sound quality is not all that great on these older movies, and then the samurai language is just so completely different from modern Japanese. And these samurai actors are just kind of speaking a real guttural, kind of growling their lines out. I just couldn't understand any of it. And while I was in Japan, I could never find a version of Seven Samurai that had English subtitles, because I was in Japan. This used to bug me a lot, actually. This is another digression. But I don't know, you know, like a movie like Seven Samurai that's been released internationally and the subtitles are available for it, I don't understand why they didn't have those as an option on the DVD. Because even when I would rent the DVD in Japan, they would never have English subtitles on it. Very few DVDs that I rented in Japan had the option of English subtitles. I don't know why. I mean, it's a DVD. You just add on the, you know, you can switch it on, switch it off. Just add on the option. I know the subtitles have already been created. Sorry, that's a digression. Never saw it in Japan because I couldn't understand it, couldn't find the English subtitles. Had a hard time tracking it down even when I was back in America. In my local video rental stores, back when video rental stores were still a thing, I would go in, I would look for, you know, I'd go to the foreign film section and look for Seven Samurai. I could never seem to find it. So, you know, to this day, it's still on my list of things to see. Not only because it's quite famous as a Japanese film, but also it's quite famous as a film in general. Although, another digression, this might interest you. If you're actually in Japan, most of these classic Japanese films that Westerners are so enthused about, Japanese people have never seen or don't really care about. So like Kurosawa films, at least with kind of Japanese people my generation, they just hadn't seen them, didn't care about them. A lot of younger Japanese people didn't even really know about these films. Okay, so I'm doing all that preamble because I'm going to talk about Magnificent Seven, which is a remake of Seven Samurai, which you probably already knew. Although, at least for me, it took me a few years before I found this out. Like, I remember hearing about the movie The Magnificent Seven, and not actually cluing in that this was a remake of Seven Samurai until, I don't know, I was 24 or something and read it on the internet, and then was like, Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven. So The Magnificent Seven is a remake of Seven Samurai, but it's set as a Western, which makes a lot of sense. Because I think Akira Kurosawa's samurai films were very much influenced by Westerns. So it makes sense to remake them as Westerns, and I think not only Seven Samurai, but several of his other films have been remade as Westerns. The one about the bodyguard who was... I forget the name. There's two rival gangs, and there's the one guy who kind of switches his allegiance back and forth between them. I think that was also remade as a Western. Anyways, all right. Another thing Japanese people have always really loved Westerns. It's another kind of fun trivia fact for you. Japanese people have this fascination with Westerns, and kind of cowboy movies have historically been very popular in Japan. And when I lived there from 2001 to 2009, they still enjoyed a popularity. I don't know what it's like now. I'm sure these fads kind of go in trends and ups and downs. But The Magnificent Seven was something some of my Japanese students were telling me about, saying, "Hey, have you ever seen The Magnificent Seven? It's really interesting." And I think they knew it had been based on a Japanese movie, but they also kind of were really fascinated by these Westerns. So yeah, I picked it up out of the video store, and sorry about all that preamble. Here I am with my review. So this is a film, I think this came out in the late 60s. It's got an all-star cast, or at least it was all-star at the time. Some of these names have not quite as famous as they used to be, but Yul Brynner, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, James Colburn, and Eli Wallach. Unfortunately, because this is an ensemble movie, they don't all get as much time to shine on the screen as you would like. So there are a lot of actors in here with a lot of charisma, but a lot of them are just regulated to supporting roles because there are too many big name actors in one movie. Also, they all are going around wearing cowboy hats, which obscures their faces a bit. Kind of a shame to pay for all these famous actors and then hide their faces. And especially like in the wide shots, when they're kind of running around and shooting in a wide shot, it's really kind of hard to tell who is who sometimes. But for what it's worth, yeah, a lot of impressive actors. So Steve McQueen is, as always, the king of cool. James Colburn, he's one of these guys I never heard of before as a kid, but he's become one of my favorite underrated actors. I saw him recently. He was in The Great Escape and Hell is for Heroes, which coincidentally, both of those movies also had Steve McQueen in them. He was also in the R. Man Flint movie series, which was an attempt to rip off James Bond in the late 60s. He played Secret Agent Flint. He's in this movie as just kind of a callous knife thrower. He's a little bit of the just kind of strong, silent type. I think he's criminally underused in this movie. I was just complaining that because there's too many famous people in this movie, they don't all get used. It did strike me, I don't know if anybody else has ever thought this, but he reminded me so much of Leonard Nimoy, the guy who played Spock on the original Star Trek. Just kind of his mannerisms, his kind of, I thought his face looked a bit like Leonard Nimoy, his kind of silent performance. Yul Brynner is the headliner of this movie. Now, Yul Brynner is one of those guys who was really famous in his day. Everybody knows the name. The only Yul Brynner movie I had seen up until now was The King and I, which is a terrible movie. And Yul Brynner just looks ridiculous in that movie. And I kind of thought Yul Brynner was a joke. But he's not a joke. Like, The King and I was just... That wasn't like the average Yul Brynner movie. He can do better if he's in a better movie. And in this movie, he does really well. He just looks really cool. He's like the typical tough guy. Some of it's a little bit cliche. You know, like somebody will be threatening him, and he's just ignoring the guy threatening him to light his cigar. Slowly light his cigar. But he pulls it off well. He plays the part well. Now, the plot of this movie is not particularly remarkable. It's just kind of a shoot-it-out type movie. But you don't want to watch a Western for the plot. You watch a Western for the atmosphere. You know, the masculinity, the feeling that there's sand getting in your mouth. The shirt's kind of soaked through with sweat. The faces covered with grime. The kind of laconic cowboy heroes who are just so relaxed and not worried about a thing in the world. All of that comes through brilliantly in this movie. So strongly recommend, just for the cinematography and the atmosphere and the acting. It's worth checking out. And one of these days, I really hope to see Seven Samurai, and I'll review it when I do.